Welcome to another creepy story. Tonight, we're diving into a strange and unsettling tale that will make you question what's real. But be warned, once you start, there's no going back. If you enjoy stories like this, hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new scary story. Also, if you have your own real creepy story, share it in the comments, and we might just turn it into a video with your name featured. Let's get started. You don't last long in this line of work if you let every scene get under your skin. I learned that early on. You build walls inside yourself, file each case away, and remind yourself it's just a job. Blood, fluids, bone fragments, the smell of human rot baked into a mattress for weeks, none of it is supposed to follow you home. For almost 2 decades, I thought I had mastered that skill. But one case, one scene, I can't file it away. No matter how many years pass, no matter how much disinfectant I scrub into my hands, it stays with me. My most disturbing and unexplained case as a decomposition cleaner, the one that still haunts me. It was late summer, the kind of August heat that clings to you before you even step out the door. The call came in early, just past 5 in the morning. Sheriff's office. Routine on paper, elderly female, no contact with neighbors, mail piling up, welfare check, officers forced entry. They found her deceased. I'd heard the same script 100 times before, but the deputy's voice caught on the location. He hesitated just a moment too long before saying it. That pause, I've learned to trust pauses. They're warning signs. The address was on a quiet street, one of those neighborhoods where time seems to move slower. Single-story homes, cracked driveways, flags on porches. From the outside, you'd think the house was normal, a little overgrown, mailbox stuffed with envelopes, but nothing that screamed tragedy. Still, I knew the second I stepped out of my truck and saw the deputy waiting on the curb with his coffee going cold, something was wrong. He didn't even approach me. He just said, "You'll want to see it yourself." His tone was steady, but his eyes looked tired in a way that told me he'd been staring at something he couldn't explain. When I stepped inside, the air hit me first. After nearly 2 decades, you learn to read a room with your nose before your eyes. Decomposition has its own language, and this wasn't it. Yes, there was that sweet, cloying stench of death, the unmistakable rot that lingers in your throat like spoiled fruit. But layered under it was something else, a chemical note, faint but sharp, sterile yet metallic. It didn't belong. And then there was the silence. No fridge humming, no clock ticking, no faint breeze from an air vent. Just stillness, so complete it pressed against your skin. The living room was unnervingly neat. Mail stacked perfectly on the coffee table, a folded blanket on the couch with crisp edges. Everything in its place, untouched, preserved. That's not how these homes usually look by the time I arrive. Normally there's chaos, evidence bags left by cops, drawers pulled open, footprints from paramedics. But this house was staged, like someone wanted it frozen in time. The bedroom door was sealed when I got there, the sheriff's evidence tape torn where they'd forced their way in. Even before I opened it, the smell pressed harder. It felt like something was pushing out from behind that door, thick and warm. I pulled my respirator tight, twisted the straps until I felt the seal, and stepped inside. The blinds were half drawn, letting narrow slices of sunlight cut across the room. Dust motes floated in those beams, perfectly suspended, like they hadn't been disturbed in weeks. At first glance, the room was as ordinary as the living room. Bed against the far wall, nightstand with a lamp, a half-filled water glass. And then my eyes landed on her. She was lying on her back on the left side of the bed, arms crossed neatly over her abdomen, fingers curled, almost as though she'd been placed. Her body was in advanced decomposition. Skin marbled in greens and browns, abdomen swollen, face drawn tight and waxy. The bedding beneath her was stained deep and wide, fluids that had seeped for weeks into the mattress and pooled at the edges. I started my checklist automatically: stage of decay, contamination zones, expected removal time, but my mind stumbled on the details. Her fingernails were clean, too clean. After 3 weeks in summer heat, nails usually tell their own story. Soil trapped underneath from scratching, insect migration, but hers looked scrubbed, almost unnatural. And then I noticed the floor. At the foot of the bed, maybe 2 feet from where her legs ended, was a circle in the carpet. Perfect, precise, the size of a dinner plate. No stains, no dust, fibers, standing straight like they'd never been touched. While the rest of the carpet was dull and worn, this circle was clean, almost waxy. Even stranger, the fluids that had seeped from her body spread outward in an irregular oval but stopped cold at the edge of that circle, like something invisible had blocked them. I didn't say anything to the deputy. I've learned not to voice every oddity until I know the whole picture. But my eyes kept drifting back to that circle as I worked. It wasn't bleach. I'd seen bleach spots before, even edges, splash arcs. This was intentional. I crouched low, flashlight angled across the fibers. The circle shimmered faintly under the beam, not wet, not sticky, but treated with something. I reached out, pressed a gloved hand into it. The carpet was stiff, unnatural, and carried that same faint chemical scent I'd been detecting since I entered the house. I swapped gloves and leaned closer. Even through the respirator I caught it stronger here, sharp, metallic, with a strange sweetness underneath. Not ammonia, not bleach, not anything I could name. The deputy broke his silence behind me. When we found her, that spot was warm. His voice was quiet, almost ashamed of the words. I froze. Warm. He nodded. Everything else was room temperature. That patch, you could feel it through your boots. The air in my lungs seemed heavier after he said it. I pressed harder into the carpet, half expecting heat to rise through my glove, but all I felt was the unnatural stiffness of treated fibers. Still, the idea wouldn't leave me. Heat, a perfect circle, fluids halted, mid-seepage like gravity had been denied, and a chemical no lab could easily identify. I'd cleaned hundreds of scenes: suicides, overdoses, murders, hoarding nightmares that nearly put me in the hospital, but nothing like this. Nothing that bent the rules of physics I relied on. Normally, decay tells a story. Gravity pulls fluids, heat accelerates bloating, insects migrate toward orifices. But here the story broke in the middle. The body said one thing, the carpet said another, and that circle at the foot of the bed, that circle was watching me. I set my kit down by the closet and let my hands move the way they always do. Plastic sheeting first, then absorbent pads overlapping like shingles, then the red-lined bags gaping open, waiting. In biohazard remediation, you learn to put your nerves on rails. Routine is the only thing that keeps panic from sneaking in through the seams of your suit. Still, even with the respirator sealed, I kept catching that faint chemical thread, a dry, metallic sweetness that didn't belong to any cleaner or solvent I've used in 17 years as a decomposition cleaner. It braided through the smell of rot like a second voice whispering under the first. I worked the primary site by the book, bedding off in careful folds. Fluids contained, edges shaved with a scraper so the contamination wouldn't smear outward. The mattress moved like dead weight soaked in August. Every inch I lifted sent up another warm breath of sweetness. The stain map said weeks. The staged neatness said control. But the circle at the foot of the bed said something else entirely. When the worst was bagged and contained, I finally let myself kneel by the patch. I angled my flashlight at the fibers until they turned to tiny silver reeds. They didn't lie like the rest of the carpet. They stood, stiff and uniform, a field of bristles lacquered in something too even to be chance. I took out my UV. In most true crime cleanups, biologicals bloom under the violet beam, regular, blotched, brighter where fluids pooled. Not here. The circle glowed like frost, even and thin, as if every strand had been dipped in the same invisible shell. I pressed with 2 fingers through double gloves. The carpet flexed, resisted, and held. There was grit, the faintest sand of something that had dried and bonded to the fiber. Behind me, the deputy shifted his weight. "Told you it was warm," he said, voice low in the doorway. I kept my eyes on the circle. "Was the bedroom door locked when you arrived?" "Deadbolt from the inside." He paused. "No prints on the bolt. Clean to clean." I scored a perimeter cut 2 inches outside the edge. The blade sang at first, easy through old pile. Then the tone changed. Less fabric, more shell. The circle lifted like a lid. The padding beneath should have been tan and swollen, dark where fluids chased gravity. It wasn't. It looked new. No stains, no dust, no impression. I slid my hand under and felt the subfloor, and the hair on my forearms prickled inside the Tyvek. Wood should be rough, it should catch at latex. This was smooth, warm in a way that had nothing to do with air temperature, more like a hand had just left it. I swapped gloves, bagged the first slice of padding, and took out an oscillating saw with a fine blade. I set the depth shallow and made a scoring pass along the plywood seam. The pitch climbed an octave as the teeth met something that wasn't wood. When I eased the blade back, the air found misteril sweet. Metallic hand. For a second I tasted it under the filter. Taste buds firing on phantom memory. Embalming lab, old varnish, hot copper coins. I worked a scraper into the score and pried. The panel didn't crack. It unsealed. A tiny pop, a sigh, and a thread of warmth unspooled against my wrist. I angled the light down into the gap and saw no joist, no insulation, no crawl, just a shallow void boxed in by a material that shouldn't live under a 1970s ranch. Pale, matte, seamless, like ceramic that wanted to be wood. The beam slid along it without scattering, no dust, no spiderwebs, no history. "What is it?" the deputy asked. "I don't know. In my line of work, those words should be comforting. They mean, not my problem. Call the next person on the chain." Instead, they hung there, heavy. I took swabs of the grit from the carpet circle and scraped a wafer from the subfloor coating. Tiny, translucent, brittle. Every micro-movement released that sterile sweetness, like something preserved too long was still letting go in thin, invisible breaths. The thermometer clipped to my vest read 80 degrees Fahrenheit at the void edge and 77 degrees Fahrenheit at the bedroom threshold. 3 degrees isn't much until you remember wood is honest. It doesn't hold secrets. It gives you the room you give it. This wood was keeping something to itself. I set a penny on the panel and waited. 30 seconds later I picked it up. Warm. I told myself that didn't matter. I told myself a lot of things in that room. I widened the opening by an inch, then stopped. Protocol is a religion when the scene starts whispering in a language you don't recognize. I laid clean sheeting over the gap to keep particulates out. The deputy's boots crackled faintly over the plastic, and just for a moment I let my eyes leave the work and study the room like a stranger. The dusty blinds. The worker's hands folded on a belly that had risen and fallen until it couldn't tee. The photo on the wall of a younger woman in front of a church. The glass so clean it was either new or wiped recently by someone who doesn't live here. I went back to my checklist, but the checklist had holes now. The lower half of the body looked subtly different, less bloat below mid-chin, a firmness in the tissue retention that didn't match the calendar in my head. I'd chalk it up to air currents on most jobs, or a mattress crease, or a draft from a floor register. There was no register, and when I checked the nail beds, they had a pale cast. I hated seeing a chalky ghosting that made me think of vapor exposure. I'd seen that once in a lab accident. Formaldehyde and something hotter. A preservative aerosol a careless tech had let ride the air for a minute too long. I packed the samples, labeled them with time and GPS, sealed the chain of custody form in a sleeve. I cleaned what I could clean, walls up to midline, baseboards and outlets, every path in and out, every tool that had kissed the scene. An air scrubber hummed on low in the hall, HEPA filters sucking at the edges of the metallic sweetness like it was a rumor. The readout on my handheld particulate counter stayed just above baseline over the circle and returned to normal at the doorway, as if the room was divided by a line I couldn't see. When the body left on a gurney shrouded in clean white, the room should have lightened. They usually do. The weight of the worst part goes with them. But the quiet here didn't lift. If anything, it settled, making itself comfortable like a guest who doesn't intend to leave. I finished my paperwork with the deputy in the hall. He was a good one, didn't fill silence with talk. Before I left, I stepped back into the bedroom alone and stood at the foot of the bed frame, at the edge of that sealed panel. The plastic shifted infinitesimally under my boots. In the beam of my flashlight, dust motes drifted, then paused. Not fell paused asked. If the air itself had a stitch in it, you don't tell anyone that part. You don't write it in a report. You let it sit at the back of the skull where it will wake up later while your house is quiet and the fridge hums like a faraway generator. I laid down the last strip of tape and told the room, out loud inside my hood, safe. Then I walked out and meant it, even if some part of me didn't. 3 days later I was back in my shop filling PPE bags and counting cartridges when my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. I almost let it go. I answered instead. Raw. The deputy said. Lab has prelim. I put him on speaker and set the phone on steel. The shop smelled like plastic and citrus disinfectant, the cleanest smell I know. He read the language like he was careful not to bruise it. Unknown compound present on carpet fibers and subfloor panel. Partial match markers with preservation agents and high-heat industrial coatings. No exact database correlation. The panel material, not standard resin, not anything common. Their words, he said. Unusual thermal retention, residual warmth, unexplained. And the autopsy? I asked, though my stomach had already started the answer. Cardiac arrest, he said. No trauma, no overdose, but they noted the nail beds, pale, chalky, fingernails clean, and there's a line on the lower leg's tissue preservation inconsistent with the rest of the body. I could see the line. I could see the circle. I could see the way the fluids had stopped, the way a dog stops at an invisible fence. One more thing, he added. We rechecked the floor, day after you left. That square read 3 degrees warmer again. Room closed, no power, same as before. I didn't realize I was holding a nitrile glove in both hands until it snapped, blue rubber puckering like a popped balloon. The sound startled me in my own shop. For a long stretch, neither of us said anything. We didn't need to. The facts were already saying too much. After he hung up, I stood among my shelves of order filters, pads, rolled plastic, and thought about how much comfort we take from names. Once you can name a thing: mold, blood, ammonia, grief, you can put it in a box. You can write a line under it and move on. What do you do when it won't tell you its name? That night, in my own bed, the house cooling around me, I finally admitted what I hadn't in the moment. I was afraid of a circle of carpet, not because it was supernatural, because it wasn't, because it had been made by a hand, or a mind, that wanted a particular effect, and achieved it so perfectly it could keep heat after the room forgot what heat was, and keep sweetness and metal blooming under hospital-grade cleaner like a stubborn memory. I closed my eyes. The dark pressed like August. Somewhere, a refrigerator compressor clicked. The sound should have grounded me. It didn't. In the half-sleep before I finally went under, I felt the faintest warmth across my shins, as if something in that sealed void still remembered a different air and wanted me to remember it too. When you do this work long enough, you stop dreaming about the bodies. It's never the bodies, it's the rooms, the stillness, the moments when something doesn't add up and your mind keeps chewing at it like a tooth that won't stop aching. That was me 3 nights after the call with Ramirez, lying in my own bed, staring at the ceiling fan as if its blades might write me an answer. I couldn't stop thinking about that circle, the warmth under the floor, and the chalky pale nail beds. By the 4th day, I drove past Havenbrook Drive again. I didn't have to. My job there was done, paperwork filed, bags handed over. But my truck seemed to steer itself, rolling down those quiet streets where every lawn said someone cared or used to. The house looked ordinary, like any other: mailbox fixed, grass trimmed, a contractor's van in the driveway. Already moving on, already preparing to cover the memory with new carpet and fresh paint. I parked across the street, engine idling. I told myself I was just curious how fast they'd repair it. But in truth, I wanted to see if the house still felt the same. In this line of work, you learn that spaces sometimes wear their grief like a second skin. No matter how clean, how fresh, some rooms whisper. From the curb, I couldn't hear it. That should have comforted me. It didn't. 2 weeks later, Ramirez called again. His voice was lower this time, like he was in a place he didn't want overheard. You remember the photo on the wall? He asked. The church portrait, I said. Yeah, they ran it through records. That wasn't her. I sat forward. What do you mean it wasn't her? The family says she never owned that dress. Never went to that church. They swore up and down that photo wasn't in the house last time they visited. He paused. It was recent. Frame was dust-free. Placed deliberately. I didn't like where that thought led. Someone in that locked room before Ramirez forced the door had placed a photo that didn't belong. He kept going. We asked the neighbors. One said they saw lights in the bedroom some nights, but the woman was already gone by then. Autopsy put her death weeks earlier. Silence stretched between us, filled only by the faint crackle of his line. Finally, he said what I hadn't wanted to hear. Someone was in there with her. After that realization worked on me like a fever. The circle wasn't just an anomaly, it was evidence, a marker left behind by something or someone that had no business in that bedroom. And if Ramirez was right, whoever it was hadn't just left a footprint, they'd lingered. I tried to shake it off, drown myself in other jobs, suicides, accidents, even a homicide cleanup that left half the drywall stripped bare. Usually, the brutality of other cases is enough to eclipse the strange ones. Not this time. Every scene felt lighter compared to Havenbrook. Every stain felt honest, every smell predictable, and that circle kept creeping back into my mind, sharp as a photograph. One night I broke my own rule and pulled up the lab report Ramirez had emailed unofficially. I scrolled through the technical jargon until one phrase stopped me cold. Residual compound demonstrates unusual thermal retention, consistent with synthetic resins used in preservation environments. That was clinical language for, this thing holds heat like it's alive. I closed the laptop, but the words burned behind my eyelids. Preservation environment. That wasn't carpet cleaner. That wasn't furniture polish. That was something designed, applied, and left to work. And then I remembered her lower legs. preserved better than the rest of her, as if the circle had been feeding something upward. The next morning I drove back to Havenbrook. Contractors were gone, house quiet. Through the front window I could see the new carpet, beige, generic, soulless, covering the circle, hiding it under fresh fibers. But as I stood there, something crawled through me. The certainty that the warmth was still under that floor, humming like a hidden machine no one could unplug. I didn't go inside, I didn't have the right. Instead, I stood on the curb until a neighbor glanced out their blinds, and I forced myself back into the truck. Driving away, I caught myself looking in the rearview mirror, expecting to see that perfect circle glowing faintly through the walls like an ember. Weeks passed. Life stacked new jobs on top of old ones. Still, the weight didn't lift. Every time I stripped off a Tyvek suit, every time I sealed a red bag, I thought of the circle. And worse, I thought of the person who placed it there, because if the photo wasn't hers, if the warmth wasn't natural, then someone had done it. Someone had been in that room while she lay dying or after she was already gone. Ramirez called me one last time. "You ever hear of containment experiments?" he asked. "Depends on the context," I said carefully. Chemical labs, industrial testing, even some military contracts. They use synthetic compounds to keep samples stable in controlled heat. His tone dropped. That's what the lab tech said it reminded her of. Not identical, but close. "Why, tell me this?" "Because," he said, "I can't stop thinking about it either. And if this was a test, she wasn't just a victim, she was the experiment." The line went dead. That night I didn't sleep. My mind kept circling the same unanswered questions. Why her? Why that house? Why a perfect circle under the bed? The clean nails, the pale nail beds, the warmth that wouldn't heat, all of it spun together until the room around me felt too tight. I tell people my job is about cleaning, about making a space safe, and it is. But there's a truth I don't share. Sometimes it's not the blood or decay that haunts you. It's the unknowns, the stains you can't scrub, the questions you can't answer. That house on Havenbrook Drive gave me the worst one of my career. Because here's what keeps me awake. Every rule of decomposition broke in that room. Heat pooled low instead of rising. Fluids stopped at an invisible wall. A woman's hands were scrubbed clean by something that left chalk in her nail beds. And beneath it all, a floor still warm weeks after she died, treated with a chemical no lab could name. You want the truth? I don't think it mattered who she was. I think the circle was the point. A mark of something testing the edges of our world inside the quiet walls of a suburban bedroom. And I was the one who found it. I've scrubbed blood off tile, stripped flesh out of carpet, wiped human lives into safe emptiness. But this one I can't clean. No matter how much disinfectant I pour over the memory, it stays. I still feel the warmth through my gloves. I still smell that dry metallic sweetness under the filter. I still see the dust motes hanging in that sealed air like they were waiting for something. Some jobs you walk away from, others buckle themselves into the passenger seat and ride with you for the rest of your life. This one is still sitting beside me, and I know it always will, because no matter how many years pass, I can't stop asking one question. What was in that circle before they took it away? And worse, where is it now? Thank you all for joining me on these journeys. Your support means everything, and I love reading your reactions and personal experiences in the comments. If these stories kept you on the edge of your seat or gave you chills, please hit that like button and consider subscribing for more haunting stories. Have you ever experienced something similar, or perhaps you have your own unexplainable story to share? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Each of your stories adds another layer to our growing community of horror enthusiasts. And if you think someone else might enjoy a good scare, don't forget to share this video with them. Stay tuned for more spine-chilling stories. And remember, sometimes the scariest tales are the ones that could happen to any of us. Thank you again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video, if you dare.